The Johnny Furphy trade is done. Obi Toppin signed. Furphy signed. Pascal Siakam signed. James Wiseman signed. And now the Pacers can do something that I didn't think they could do. We have a lot to talk about the Pacers' new financial situation, looking forward to their team building, and looking at how their free agency next year is going to be fascinating. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we have a week of free agency in the rearview mirror. Even more than that, in reality, the Pacers have officially signed every player that they have reportedly agreed to terms with prior to free agency. And the nature of those contracts is fascinating because of what it means the Pacers can still do. And so we will talk about all that today. The moratorium's done. Transactions have happened. Where does that leave the Pacers? What can they still do? Although theoretically, there's a lot more than in practice risk, and I'll explain why in a second. And then we'll talk more about, now that the moratorium's here, what the Pacers can do contractually with some other players like TJ McConnell. We'll look ahead at some other stuff coming this offseason, next year's free agency, so much more to get to at a high level. And we can do full shows detailing this stuff because some of it is extremely important to the next year or year and a half of the Pacers. So the 6th, Saturday, the moratorium ended at 12:01, which opened up a whirlwind of stuff the Pacers could officially do, including complete the Johnny Furphy trade. For those unaware, they traded cash and the 36th pick for the 35th pick, and they couldn't do that until July 6th because the Spurs could not take in any more cash in a trade during the last league year. So it had to be this league year, and the first day, because possible, was the 6th they traded for and signed Furphy on the 6th. We'll talk about his contract in a second. They signed Obi Toppin officially, Pascal Siakam officially, although we haven't gotten a press release about that just yet. They signed Wiseman officially. So we have a lot of details that have kind of changed the scope of Pacers free agency ever so slightly. Let's start with Wiseman. The hunch was there that this was a minimum, and this was confirmed to be a minimum by the time that he was signed prior to the end of the moratorium. Some details on Wiseman, for those who didn't see it, is this year is only $500,000 guaranteed of his minimum salary. Team option on the second season, and even that is lightly guaranteed, like 500 something thousand. So people have called this a low risk, high reward signing, and I think that's inaccurate. I think it's a no risk, high reward signing. I mean, $500,000 is like a fifth of the season, a fourth of the season. Like if they could tell by December 10th or whatever it is, oh, this guy stinks, they could cut him then and have very little penalty, and they could try to all season to see if they can make him any better. Like there is like legitimately no downside to this is the Pacers. A very small hit this season that they'll have to take if he's not any good. But if you've been listening to me babble during all of free agency, you've heard me say, I wonder how much of this is guaranteed because of the Pacers' financial situation with regards to the tax. That's a good signing by the Pacers. And I think a good decision by Wiseman to go somewhere that has turned players looking for a new opportunity into better players who are making more money elsewhere. Jalen Smith was probably a nice blueprint for someone like James Wiseman. Thing two, you heard me wonder on this podcast contractually is where's Johnny Furphy going to come in? 4 years, $8.59 million, the official-ish detail there, with a fourth-year team option. So this is going to be similar to Andrew Nembhard, for example, with the team option and restricted free agency stuff going on the end. But Nembhard signed a 4-year deal for about $8.5 million when he was signed 2 years ago. And that team option means that if Furphy's awesome, the Pacers can make him a restricted free agent after 3 years, and it's super cheap all 3 years. $1.85 million in the first year, just a little over that, actually. That was my guess, if you've been listening to this, about where this would come in. So I got pretty close looking at last year's 35th pick. But that is in and official and makes my estimations very easy. And then the third official thing that came in that there was some wondering about, that you've heard me talk about briefly that I wondered is Obi Toppin's contract. And this one's the most interesting and has probably the most actual bearing on some of the other stuff we're going to talk about today. Obi Toppin's came in, and it's 4 for 60 as suggested, but it's really a little different than that. It is $58 million of base salary with $2 million of bonuses. Incentives is a better word to use for what I'm saying. They're considered unlikely incentives, so they don't actually carry a cap charge this season. Not that that super matters. And of course, if he gets paid that, it counts against the tax. But I've had those bonuses described to me as unlikely. In fact, every Pacers bonus on their team I would consider exceedingly unlikely for them to hit this year. And we'll talk about incentives and bonuses later in this podcast because they're a big deal. I don't actually know what Toppin's incentives are, but I will say the fact that he has them means his base salary in the first year of his contract is actually lower than what has been talked about in the public sphere, given his 5-year, $60 million contract. And the first year base salary is below $13 million. It's just barely over the mid-level exception, which was where a lot of people estimated his contract could start. So good job by a lot of people who keep up with the Pacers and their cap stuff to know what all these numbers could end up at. Everybody got pretty close. But in a little bit of practice, if you just slowly stack up all these deals, right? With Wiseman, it's a minimum. It can't be lower than the minimum number we know, but $500K guaranteed gives them some flexibility. Furphy at 1.85 is pretty good for a low first-year number. Toppin's base salary comes in a little lower than everybody thought. All of a sudden, this adds up to the Pacers being $2.48 million away from the luxury tax with 14 players. Let me tell you why that matters. The veterans' minimum salary, if you sign a player to a 1-year minimum contract, their cash payout is lower on a minimum deal because the league reimburses part of it, right? They don't want teams to be incentivized to sign lesser experienced players because their minimum salary is smaller. So any player with 2 or more years of experience has the same minimum salary as a 2-year service player because of that, if they sign a 1-year minimum contract. And that is a just over $2.87 million cap hit to be specific. And if you noticed, I said the Pacers are $2.487 million over the tax, under the tax right now. So the Pacers can fit in right now a 15th player because of some of the creativity they had with these contracts. They're able to do that and not have to waive anybody. Kendall Brown can stick, and they could do that. They could sign, but to be clear, a 1-year minimum, not a 2-year like with Wiseman, because then the cap hit goes up and there's no league reimbursement. A 1-year veteran minimum salary player does fit in the Pacers' plans, and they would still be under the tax. Now, their bonuses are scary, right? If any of, Myles Turner has some incentives in his contract, TJ McConnell's are almost exactly the difference between what the tax and the Pacers spending would be. And then Obi Toppin has some as well, as we just talked about. So it would be possible for them to go over, which is where having flexibility with Kendall Brown and James Wiseman would matter, is if they could open up some of that distance to feel better. But I've talked a lot about flexibility and what the Pacers can do, and can they fill their team? Maybe they'll carry 14. I think given the way they structured some of this stuff, it looks like they're set up to have a 15th guy. It looks like they're prepared to do that. And I don't know that they're going to, but I would say their salary sheet very much dictates that they could have a 1-year minimum contract on the team still. And I would guess that they would be not guaranteed, because then they'd open up the most flexibility possible to make decisions with their team. But I had the assumption last week that, we'll need to see Wiseman specifics and Toppin specifics and Furphy specifics. Once we do, we'll go from there. But maybe the Pacers have to cut Kendall Brown to finalize the back end of this roster. Now, I don't think that. I think it's possible for them to just sign one more veteran to a minimum deal and have their 15 guys heading into the season. But we'll see what they actually do, right? Things get tight. Summer League can change stuff, with guys on the actual roster playing in Summer League. Always trades can happen. But as of now, a week into free agency, with all these stuff officially signed, that's where the Pacers stand. They're in position to do something else still. Who that veteran could be, who would take their money? I mean, I think James Johnson would be the leader in the clubhouse. He's obviously fit in very well with this team for a while, but it could be anybody. Doug McDermott's still floating out there, teamless, right? I'm not saying they should sign him to play him, but he's a vet. He's been around for a long time. Thad Young's still out there teamless, right? There's a bunch. So that's the reality for the Pacers. Pretty shrewd stuff to be able to fit in someone else. Incentives were key in Caleb Barton's contract situation in Philly as well. If you can use incentives to your advantage, it's good. They obviously count against the first apron, which doesn't really matter to the Pacers if the tax is a hard line for them, but is still relevant to their potential future team building aspirations. So that's where they are. I don't know that they're going to sign a 15th player, but it's certainly set up for them to do so if they want to. And I'd be curious how that will shake out. So that is where we are for the Pacers 1 weekend of free agency. We will not be talking any more financial stuff. Everybody who doesn't like that stuff, it's over unless they make another signing. Everything else we talk about will be actual basketball or team building discussions going forward. And speaking of, let's pivot. Extensions. Let's talk extensions. If anything's changed in that reality, who can be extended now? Some other players who have agreed to terms with the Pacers that you haven't heard much about before we get to any of that, though. We need to talk about FanDuel. I love sports. Love sports so much, I don't want them to stop. Watch something every day. But as the playoffs end in the NBA and the NHL, there's fewer games in sports. The sports aren't sportsing like many want. FanDuel, though, they let you keep the sports going whenever you want all summer long. All you got to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus every single day, daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every single day, all summer long. And all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with a daily booster bonus every single day. And that's on FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day your second listen. There's a lot of interesting choices. Locked On Suns, because KD is injured with Team USA right now, although minorly it sounds like. Locked On any of the teams that were involved in the 6-team trade, the biggest number of teams in a trade in NBA history, involving Klay Thompson ending up with the Mavs. And the Nuggets were in that trade for some reason. Locked On Nuggets to hear about their sad offseason in Denver. Dario Saric, I guess, is pretty good. Let's keep going on the Pacers. So the moratorium ended. Something else happened when the moratorium ended. That was July 6th. TJ McConnell officially became eligible for a contract extension. He was eligible last summer for a brief period too. They have talked about it a little differently now with Chad Buchanan saying, TJ being a Pacer for life and all this stuff. And he's a good player. He is a good player who fits their style, fits behind Haliburton, with Haliburton, everything. Same argument for Obi Toppin, right? A good player who fits this team style and can play with or without Haliburton is worth keeping, especially in a market like Indiana, where they'll have positive value on their next deal. TJ McConnell is extension eligible. Same as Andrew Nembhard. The max it could go is 4 years, about $80 million. I don't know if I didn't get estimated average salary numbers from anybody, but about there, give or take a few $1 million either direction. That is now permitted to be signed. Now, people responded to me sharing that information on Twitter and said, what about Andrew Nembhard? I mean, look, Andrew Nembhard's under contract with the Pacers, so they could talk to him about contract stuff, but he is not eligible to sign anything, air quotes on that, until July 22nd, because that's when he officially got signed originally after getting drafted in 2022. So has anything changed here, right? We talked about extensions a lot a while ago when we ran through all the Pacers offseason stuff, right? Looking at Kobe White, Gabe Vincent, Trey Jones contracts, like where does that land McConnell? What's he actually worth at his age? Well, the tricky thing for the Pacers is actually their future money more than anything, because they have a lot of guys who are good and worth the salary that they will be paid this season and beyond the seasons. The problem is if you have too many guys, you're still going to run into a financial crunch with the tax, and they're getting pretty close. And that doesn't even include Turner or Nembhard money for next year or a bunch of other stuff. And I don't want to get too in the weeds, but I'm going to do an entire episode on 2025-26 free agency because of how fascinating I think the Pacers are going to have to be in the next year to figure out how that team's going to look. And so I don't want to get too in the weeds right now, but what I will say is it's not as easy to me of a decision with McConnell as it felt like when free agency opened. I still think there's a good number to be found. And if, again, good contracts are good contracts. If it's tradable, that's great. You're not worried about it. And you want to keep all your good players for as long as you can. So I still think it makes sense to do it. Same with Andrew Nembhard. If Andrew Nembhard could sign any extension given their restrictions on what they can offer him, I think they should be doing backflips. But with McConnell, it's hard. They have to make sure it's the right number to be bidding, because their next summer is going to be extremely tight after Toppin at 14 million ish base salary, Siakam in at 45.5 million base salary, probably over 2 million for Johnny Furphy. Right, they're going to have their own draft pick as of right now. In fact, they can't trade it because of the Stepien rule. So there's just a lot of factors that say, yes, TJ McConnell is extension eligible, but it's not as easy as it felt before free agency now that all the numbers are officially in. I'll be curious if they actually get something done there, because they can do it anytime during this coming season, right? And so unless McConnell prices himself out of 4 for 80, they'll always be able to do it. They'll always have the most up-to-date information. There's no rush if you're the Pacers, but at the same time, getting it done is nice. In fact, he gets trade restricted for 6 months. So the only rush if you're the Pacers is getting it done before you couldn't trade him this season, in theory, if that's something that would matter to them. But I don't know that it's as easy to do a TJ McConnell extension as it was before this started. Andrew Nembhard, I said, that when that report came out, the first one about this being a possibility for the Pacers this summer, I said, if I'm Andrew Nembhard, I don't know if I'd take this, given where the mid-level is going. If the Pacers can max offer him about 4 for 80 on an extension, if he takes that, the Pacers should be elated, absolutely elated about what that spells for their team. And their other extension-eligible player this offseason is Isaiah Jackson on a rookie scale deal. Now, especially given that they're going to need to open up money to keep some guys next year, that seems exceedingly unlikely. Without knowing anything, I can't say for sure, but I would put the chances of that extremely, extremely low. Jalen Smith was extension eligible. He's obviously not with the Pacers anymore, so not an exercise worth doing. So that's it for their extensions. That is what is facing them heading into the rest of the summer. Is I think the odds of McConnell extension still exists, but have dropped since we last talked about them. Nembhard ones I would not put very high, although again they should be thrilled if they could get it. And Isaiah Jackson's probably pretty close to zero, not because he's not worth another contract, right? He's a fine backup center. It's just very hard to imagine what that kind of strangle would look like for the Pacers. So that's their current reality. That's the stuff they can do. Two other things that they have done that kind of have skated around. They have 2 Exhibit 10 guys in the door that they've agreed to. I don't know how to say his first name. Tominaga from Nebraska. I think it's Kesey. Might be Kisai. I don't know. He has agreed to an Exhibit 10 deal with the Pacers. He will not be playing Summer League. He's with Team Japan. He'll probably, I don't know this because they're not down to 12 yet. They're at 16. But assuming he's not one of the last 4 cuts, he'll be playing in the Olympics. Japan is one of the Asia teams in the Olympic field. So he will not be playing Summer League with the Pacers. But Exhibit 10 for him, he just wrapped up his college career, ended at Nebraska. And then the other Exhibit 10 the Pacers have, at least that we've heard about, there's probably more out there at some point, and I'll explain this in a second without going too crazy, is Josiah Jordan-James, who just went to Tennessee. He played in high school with Aaron Nesmith. He knows Chris Middleton pretty well. Those are the only 2 guys. So for those who don't know or want a better explainer about Exhibit 10s, they are people call them training camp contracts. I don't know if that's perfect in reality, and the Pacers are the exact team why that's not a good, perfect reality. So what an Exhibit 10 contract is if a player signs it, it's a 1-year non-guaranteed minimum NBA contract, which is already, the offer is what it is. The real pro of it has to do with the G League. If you waive a player who has Exhibit 10 language in their contract, and then they go to your G League affiliate and stay there for at least 60 days, they get a bonus. The max that bonus can be this season is a little over $77,500. So that's a big deal on G League salaries to get that bonus. So that is primarily what Exhibit 10s are for. They can be converted to 2 ways. And a lot of times players on Exhibit 10s do come into training camp, right? And then they get waived at the end of it, and then they go to the G League. But that's not the that's not the only way they are used. In fact, the Pacers last year had a bunch of times where they would sign guys to Exhibit 10s, then waive them the next day. So with Exhibit 10 players, they actually have to go through a practice day of training camp for it to count as them signing with an NBA team, and an NBA team getting their rights in some cases, which I'll explain in a second. So that's why that has to happen that way. But especially with these 2 guys, Tominaga and James, Right? They're coming out of college and they didn't get drafted. So no one has their rights. No NBA team has their rights and no G League team has their rights. So if you give them an Exhibit 10, the G League team now has those rights. So what I'm saying is, yes, these guys have agreed to Exhibit 10 contracts. They'll be thrown around loosely as training camp contracts. And it's very possible one or both of them actually are in training camp for the Pacers, right? The David Servidis was in camp a few years ago, but he got cut. But like last year, they had no Exhibit 10 guys in camp, right? So it's possible they do none again, but it's possible these guys do actually participate, but it's also possible they get the glorified one-day signing and then immediately cut to have their G League rights. James is playing Summer League for the Pacers, so they can see him in that setting. But I just want to clear up specifically why I think the term training camp deal is wrong. It doesn't guarantee you're playing in training camp. Like, you'll get signed during training camp, but it is more effectively a G League contract. I think there's like out of all 30 teams, there's probably one guy per season who signs an Exhibit 10 deal and is so impressive or so good, or something happens where they actually are needed at the NBA level. It's very infrequent, but it does happen, right? So those two guys have been signed. Haven't even brought them up on here. Got to look up how to pronounce the names better. I apologize for that, but that is everything for Pacers 2024 free agency so far. And now we will not talk about this year's free agency at all until something happens. If the Pacers fill their 15th roster spot, if they cut somebody, if they make a trade, guess what? We'll be all over it. But in the absence of that, there's not much else to cover from a free agency perspective. What there is to talk about is basketball perspective. James Wiseman, how does he fit? What's he do? What does he not do? Other new players, the guys they drafted, now that we can actually talk to them. Summer League practices started. There's so much more to get to, though. And now, I don't want to talk about this year's free agency. I want to talk about next year's. And I just want to lay the table for a podcast that's coming up here about next year's luxury tax. Before we get to any of that, though, and trust me, you will learn a lot and be very intrigued by the future of the Pacers. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together, especially on their Instagram or social media, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. And therapy can be helpful for many things, even beyond that. It can be helpful for learning positive coping skills or learning how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It is not just for people who have experienced major trauma. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch at any time for no additional charge. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. You'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Kings. DeMar DeRozan to the Kings. Whoa. Some summers that would be the best free agent to switch teams. Not this summer. Paul George clearly takes that cake, but that's a dang good job by the Kings to be able to get him. The price is fascinating. Great job by the Spurs in that transactional string. And Chris Duarte, ex-Pacer, headed over to the Bulls in that transaction. But Locked On Kings will have the latest on DeMar DeRozan, Sacramento King. I like that fit. Let's talk about the Pacers here to close this out. So first of all, for some admin stuff here, Tyrese Haliburton's in camp with Team USA. There's a chance we're going to be talking about the Olympics next week with someone who covers the Olympics and his play with them. They play Canada and Injured Hard on Wednesday. That'll be pretty cool. So expect some USA content pretty soon. And two, Pascal Siakam's introductory press conference for being signed is Monday. There's a chance you're listening to this and it already happened. So Tuesday's episode will be all about that. What was said, what wasn't said, what does it mean, etc. And speaking of signings and going forward and in the future, that was a bad segue. Let's talk about the 2025 offseason for the Pacers very briefly. So as it stands right now, next year is maybe the most interesting free agency the Pacers have had since I have covered the team or free agencies. People talked a lot about the 2022 offseason being really interesting to them. That one was not that interesting to me, funnily enough, but this one really is, right? So next year, the expectation from at least everybody I've talked to is the salary cap and thus also the tax will grow 10%. The tax would go up a little more, but whatever. From this year, because of the new media rights deal coming in and the CBA built in, that it can't go up more than 10%. And that's great. The cap projection, $154.6 million. Awesome. The tax, close to $188 million. That's great. So the Pacers next summer will have Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam under contract, Obi Toppin and Aaron Nesmith under contract. Assuming they pick up team options, they'll have Bennedict, Mathurin, and Jarris Walker under contract. They'll have Ben Shepherd under contract and Johnny Furphy. That might be it. Kendall Brown has a team option. I would not expect that to get picked up, but maybe he has an awesome season. James Wiseman has a team option. Who knows where that goes? I would not expect that to get picked up unless he has an awesome season. And Andrew Nembhard has a team option, but I expect that to get declined if it gets to that point, because then he could go into restricted free agency. So if you delete all those team options, that would give the Pacers 8 players. 8 players, that's it, with contracts for next season. And they would already be kind of close to thinking about the tax, which is just remarkable, right? So if you just do a quick sum of those players' salaries, which I did this earlier today, and I don't know why I got rid of the sheet in Excel, but now I can walk you through the process while I do it. Just those 8 players sum up to a total team salary pre-keeping other players of $136 million. So they have about $51 million below the luxury tax to sign 7 players. And among those 7 players, they would have to fit in all Myles Turner's money, any money given to TJ McConnell, which could happen this summer. Isaiah Jackson's not among those 8 players. And of course, Andrew Nembhard's not. And so if you put in Nembhard at even if you put him in his extension at 17-ish, right? Remember, there's a $51 million gap. If you give him 17 and you give Myles Turner 28, that's $45 million of that 51. So you'd have $6 million from the tax to sign 5 players, and none of those players are TJ McConnell or Isaiah Jackson. And then you'd still have 3 more roster spots to fill. And then the next year, Bennedict Mathurin, time to get paid, buddy. And presumably Andrew Nembhard's deal would be bigger that year too. And Ben Shepherd's contract goes a little higher, and so does Jarris Walker's. And all of a sudden, it's like, whew, this team's getting close to the end. And then after that, you got to pay Aaron Nesmith and Jarris Walker and Ben Shepherd. So I bring this up briefly to say, I think the Pacers did. If I was running the Pacers, right, and you guys have heard me say this stuff this year, I would have done most of the stuff they did. In fact, pretty much all of it. I said I would keep Obi. I think they should be keeping player rights. I said I would max Pascal Siakam. I think the Furphy trade / acquisition makes sense. I might have signed a veteran center instead of a young center, but it doesn't matter. Price-wise, I would have landed on the same price of center as the Pacers, which is relevant to the current discussion. And so not talking about this free agency, but talking about next year's, man, oh man, is it going to be really hard for them to keep everyone they might want to keep at a salary that makes sense. And if they do keep everybody, right, think about this. Just think about these 3 players. Do you think you can fit in Myles Turner, TJ McConnell, and Andrew Nembhard into a $51 million bucket? Probably not. It's going to be really tricky to do that in practice. And if they can somehow do that, where all 3 of those players' average salary is $17 million, they still have to figure out how to fill the rest of their team. So do they have to slash salary elsewhere? Who would be the guy that you just trade away to fit in the rest of your team? You don't have any bad salaries on your team. The Pacers have a lot of very good, reasonable contracts. So many that they might have to make a hard decision in the next calendar year on one guy, maybe 2. They might have to let somebody go that's painful to let go. They might have to trade somebody that's painful to trade. So just keep that in mind, right? Just keep that in mind the next calendar year, because it's so easy to think that just pay the tax. I agree, right? Again, fans should want their team to pay the tax. And I have said that there is the repeater element to it, where you should want your team to pay it at the right time if they're willing to do it. Next year, certainly for the Pacers, seems like it would be a time where you think about doing it. But also next year, the Phoenix Suns and Boston Celtics team payrolls are going to be so insane that tax distributions will be nuts. And again, fans shouldn't care about that, but it's certainly relevant to how a front office would presumably think. So I wonder, and I will, again, do a much more detailed deep dive on this, if the Pacers are going to have to make a very heart-pounding ouch trade in the next year or so because of their salary situation, to make sure that they can keep as much of their talented core together, which is why amid a season of success that they're trying to build off of, and they're trying to win even more next year, their young players and how they play early in the season will be extremely important to keep up with and monitor. And that is the end of the free agency topics I have for you today. So going forward this week, you will likely get episodes about. Oh, I missed one cap thing. We'll get to in a second. This week, you'll likely get episodes on a full detailed deep dive of that 2025-26 tax. Summer League, finally. We've been talking to the players, Jarris Walker, Johnny Furphy, all the second round guys we got to talk to. So I have stories up on those guys. We'll do a Summer League preview. I will have something on Pascal Siakam and his day, his introduction, which is Monday. And then whatever else we can fit in. If they make a move, we'll obviously dive right into that as quickly as possible. So lots of fun stuff coming here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. But we pivot away from free agency now until something happens. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show and had if you had a long holiday weekend, a nice holiday weekend. Back tomorrow talking more Pacers. I'm on Twitter at Tony Arias, and the show is on there at Locked On Pacers. And this is on YouTube as well. Commenting there or Twitter is the best way to reach me. The only other thing I wanted to bring up on the show that I skipped on accident to finish up my notes is the other thing they have this offseason is rookie scale team options. Spoiler, they're going to pick up all of them. Ben Shepherd, Jarris Walker, Ben Mathurin. Easy to keep those contracts even beyond this season. We'll do more on that in the future. Thank you guys for listening. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you very soon.